What if the voice you keep brushing off as your own random thought is actually God trying to speak to you? You see, we live in a noisy world where attention is currency, hustle is worshipped, and silence feels like a threat. But here's the paradox. While the world yells louder, God often whispers softer, not because he's absent, but because intimacy never shouts. Right now, in the middle of your deadlines, distractions, and doubts, God is speaking. Not tomorrow. Not when you finally get your life together, today. And he's not just calling you to behave better, he's calling you to become someone greater. Not in the way the world defines greatness, but in the way heaven recognizes it. He's calling you to awaken. We often think a divine calling is reserved for the ultra-religious, for pastors, missionaries, saints. But what if your calling isn't in a pulpit, but in your parenting, your creativity, your business, your healing? What if God is less interested in your performance and far more invested in your alignment? Because alignment is where calling is revealed. Psychology tells us that humans are wired for purpose. When we lack it, we drift, we numb, we overwork, we overthink. We chase applause to fill the echo of unanswered questions in our soul. Questions like, why am I here? What was I made to do? Is there something more? And yes, there is. But discovering your calling doesn't begin with clarity. It begins with quiet. That deep internal stillness where your false identities start to crumble, where your inner critic loses its grip, where fear is no longer the driver, but the passenger. Because here's the truth no one talks about. Many of us aren't hearing God. Not because he's silent, but because we filled the room with too many other voices. Voices of shame, you're not qualified. Voices of fear, what if you fail? Voices of logic, that doesn't make sense. Voices of comparison, someone else is already doing it better. But let me ask you this. Since when did God ever wait for perfect conditions to call someone? Moses stuttered. David was overlooked. Paul had a past. And yet each of them heard God's voice, not in comfort, but in crisis. Not in perfection, but in surrender. And surrender, by the way, isn't passive. It's powerful. It's the decision to say, God, I may not feel ready, but I'm available. That one sentence can shift your entire destiny. Because divine calling isn't about your ability. It's about your availability. But to step into that calling, you've got to confront what's been numbing your hearing. Is it busyness, unhealed pain, addiction to approval, a need for certainty? Whatever it is, those things don't just block your peace, they distort your perception of God's voice. And when your perception is off, your direction will be too. Here's where faith amplification changes everything. Faith isn't the absence of doubt, it's the volume dial that turns up God's truth when everything else gets loud. It says, even when I don't feel it, I'll still believe it. And that belief creates motion, not blind hustle, but divine direction. That's how success begins to shift. No longer measured by status, speed, or applause, but by obedience, by wholeness, by freedom. Because your calling isn't just about what you do, it's about who you become while doing it. You become the healed. You become the whole. You become the light others were waiting for. And in the process, you help unlock the chains in others. So if you're wondering whether that small nudge in your spirit means something, if that restless ache in your chest is pointing to more, if that whisper keeps returning no matter how often you ignore it, it's not just coincidence. It's not just emotion. It's not just your overactive imagination. It might be the voice of God. So the question isn't, is God speaking? The real question is, are you listening? And if you are, what are you going to do about it?